Howdy, y'all. Did I spook ya? I'm a bat cat. Welcome to the Doki Discourse Halloween special. It's the Halloween season, a time for ghosts and ghouls, and for all to feel a healthy dose of fear. But if you consume much in the way of conservative media, odds are you've already overdosed on fear. Because fear is the primary emotion conservative politicians and pundits aim to instill in their audiences. So sit back with some caramel apples and Sour Patch watermelon, because today we're taking a look at the history and present of fear politics. To get an idea of how fear works as a political tool, let's take a look at the war on drugs. Now, what's crucial in understanding conservative fear politics is that it's almost always used to target a group or groups. In the case of the drug war, those groups were black people and the anti-war left, who were the two main enemies of the Nixon White House. Nixon decided to target these groups by associating them with drugs and then using the police force to attack their communities. Another element of fear politics is that the stated aim, what the source of the public fear is, can often be incidental. Drugs were not a particular problem in the US at the outset of the drug war, and the public didn't perceive them as such. At the beginning of the war on drugs, only 2% of Americans saw drugs as the number one problem in America, and several states were moving to decriminalize the use of marijuana. But by stoking fear, conservatives can turn fringe issues into the biggest thing in the country, and use that issue to harm the groups they were targeting in the first place. By 1989, 64% of Americans saw drugs as the number one issue, and thousands of people who were very disproportionately black were being thrown in jail for marijuana usage. The conservatives may have started the drug war fire, but it was the media that stoked it to nationwide dominance, publishing thousands upon thousands of articles about the crack epidemic, often featuring descriptions of black crack whores, crack babies, and gangbangers, designed to frighten the public of drugs, yes, but also conditioning them to see drug users as black, a strategy which was resoundingly successful, as in studies where participants were asked to picture a drug user, the overwhelming amount of people pictured a black person, despite drug use being roughly equal across racial lines. It's here where we come to another crucial component of fear politics. By stoking fear over a seemingly unrelated issue, you can target specific groups while protecting from accusations of discrimination. It is unlikely that a proposal to lock up and strip voting rights from a large percentage of African Americans would have passed. But by inciting fear over drugs, a policy that did exactly that was resoundingly popular. And it should be noted that white Americans were even more likely to support the war on drugs if they already held racial animus towards black Americans. A study found that opposition towards racial reform, not likelihood of crime victimization, was most correlated with whether or not a white person supported tough-on-crime measures. For some, fear was a tool to enact their racist ideals. For others, fear was the catalyst that pushed their racial anxiety over the edge. The widespread acceptance of the drug war made it possible to make very blatant appeals to racial bias. Perhaps most famously, George H.W. Bush campaigned on an ad featuring a convicted black man who raped and killed a white woman after escaping while out on a prison work furlough program. The ad aimed to portray Bush's opponent, Michael Dukakis, as soft on crime. And lest you doubt the racial component, the ad was the brainchild of Lee Atwater, pioneer of the Southern strategy, and guy whose entire life consisted of being racist with just enough plausible deniability. Another interesting element of fear in the war on drugs is the DARE program, and similar anti-drug messages and PSAs given to kids at the time. These anti-drug programs were filled with frightening messages, such as that if you smoked weed, you'd wind up on heroin and die, that if you did meth, you'd have a meth baby, that strangers would frequently come up to you offering free crack, that Halloween candy was full of PCP, and a lot of other things meant to terrify kids from ever trying drugs. But these programs didn't work. Studies as early as 1992 were showing that DARE not only failed to reduce drug use among minors, but actually increased it. Because it turns out, when a cop tells a bunch of kids that drugs are bad, they're gonna think, "Fuck you, pig, I'm gonna do shrooms." So not only does a fear-based approach negatively impact minority groups, but it usually also fails to address the problem it's ostensibly aiming to solve. And lest you think the drug war rhetoric died with Reagan, it's still going strong today. Take this recent tweet from conservative organization Turning Point USA.
This August, Border Patrol agents seized $4.3 million worth of fentanyl in Arizona. That's enough to kill 28 million people, 4 times the state's population.
They literally frame the amount of drugs as, "This can kill this many people." I couldn't make this more blatantly fear-mongering if I tried. But of course, the main concern of this tweet is not the fentanyl crisis, the many people suffering from addiction to this drug. They're not suggesting rehabilitation or needle exchange programs to help people recover and avoid contracting diseases. Rather, this tweet is tied to an argument for harsher border enforcement, which is the goal they really care about. So, I guess they've at least changed their target from black people to migrants? Yay? Drug abuse is and was a serious issue that needs to be addressed. But instead of a constructive response, we get a bunch of racist trash that just makes things worse. Fear rhetoric is not just reserved for drugs, however. You may have noticed that conservatives essentially never shut up about crime. In the conservative mind, crime is always on the rise. In the past few years, the right and the media have widely publicized an uptick in the homicide rate. While in a vacuum, this statement is true, it's often presented in a misleading, intentionally inflammatory manner. For starters, many on the right portray the increase as occurring exclusively in Democrat-run cities as a result of defunding the police, in an attempt to frighten people from pursuing police reform. And this is just wrong. The homicide rate increased nationwide. Rural America was also hit by rising homicide rates. We just don't hear about rural crime as much because no city of 5,000 people is going to have the same amount of local journalism as a city of 500,000. And most of these big cities either didn't reduce or even increased their police budgets. Wow, almost like more cops doesn't actually stop murder. Additionally, the increased homicide rate was often presented as an increase in violent crime as a whole. But there's like 8 different crimes that fall under the umbrella of violent crime. Sure, some of them were increasing, like homicides and gun assaults, but crimes like robbery and simple assault went down. Because there's so many things that qualify as violent crime, one can always paint the impression that crime is on the rise, even if, as a whole, it's not. This was the case during the Obama presidency. According to the FBI, violent crime fell 19% from 2008 to 2015. Yet, in a 2016 poll, 57% of voters and 78% of Trump supporters said they felt crime had gotten worse since 2008. This idea was spurred on by rhetoric from Trump about Mexico sending criminal rapists to the US, as well as the soft on crime label that gets applied to every Democratic politician. The fear of crime also leads to more crimes in some cases, such as in the case of increasing gun ownership. Overwhelmingly, people buying guns cite the purpose of self-protection, and this perception that a gun is necessary for self-protection stems from a fear of increasing crime. This is why, after practically every mass shooting event, there is a temporary spike in gun purchases. But increasing gun ownership also increases the amount of people killed by guns, both by accident and suicide, as well as in the criminal sense, as increased gun ownership is tied to increased homicide rates. Once again, we see that the fear stoked over the supposed problem is counterintuitive to actually addressing that problem. The system most often advocated by conservatives to address supposed high crime rates, broken windows policing, in which police put forth more of their resources to cracking down on minor crimes, also fails to prevent crime. The fear of crime is a widely successful panic for conservatives to ride on, though. Not only does it allow them to target black communities with disproportionate imprisonment, such as that of the drug war, not only does it allow them to attack black communities with just blatant racist appeals, such as the panic whipped up over supposed teenage black super predators that apparently existed solely to cause havoc, but it's also consistently one of the most effective electoral strategies for them. By terrifying the public, conservatives can force political opponents to conform to their rhetoric or lose. Republicans have branded Democrats as soft on crime and cast themselves as the party of law and order, despite the fact that their solutions don't actually do much to prevent crime. But because the public is so terrified of crime, Democrat politicians have consistently opted to adopt much more conservative positions on crime in the interest of winning elections. From Bill Clinton, who personally went to watch the execution of a mentally ill black man to prove his tough on crime bona fides, to Joe Biden today, who, along with the vast majority of the Democratic Party, has fully rejected the idea of defunding the police in favor of greatly increasing police budgets and claiming that it's Republicans who are anti-police. To reiterate, the impact of fear in shaping public opinion is so great that the largest sustained civil rights protest in US history over the abuse police inflict on people has been turned into a competition between the two political parties to prove that we love cops more than you do. Fear of crime and the law and order rhetoric has been American tradition for well over a century, and has almost always carried the aim of targeting Black Americans. The term law and order didn't enter common usage until the Nixon presidency, but the idea was prominent long before. It was popular in the early 1900s with the expansion of the Ku Klux Klan, who exaggerated the crime rates in the country and blamed those crimes almost wholly on Black people. In particular, Black men were portrayed as sexually assaulting white women, most famously in the film Birth of a Nation. The Klan would use this myth of a scourge of predatory Black men to encourage white vigilante justice, or rather, white terrorism, on Black people. The times may change, but the rhetoric remains largely the same. Y'all remember that George Bush ad from earlier? I'm far from the first to note its parallels to Birth of a Nation. Dangerous Black men are coming to rape our white women. The only solution? Get tough on crime. But fear politics are not wielded solely to attack Black people. The LGBTQ community has also been a major target. You're likely already familiar with the AIDS epidemic, labeled a gay disease, and accompanied by media portrayals of gay people as dangerous vectors of sickness. People were convinced that virtually any interaction with an HIV-positive individual would result in them also contracting the disease, leading many doctors to outright refuse to treat AIDS patients. Gay people faced massive discrimination, and many people died due to the panic. And in 2022, we saw history repeat itself with the monkeypox outbreak. Conservatives once again jumped to label it a gay disease, as well as claiming it only spreads through sexual contact. And while sexual contact can be a transmission method, it's not the only one, as monkeypox has been known to spread through as little as contact with an object that someone with monkeypox had previously touched. With this narrative established that monkeypox is A, a gay disease, and B, exclusively transmissible through sex, you can probably imagine what they said when children began contracting monkeypox. What should have been a concerning disease that we collectively aim to curb turned instead into an excuse to brand gay people child molesters. But monkeypox is only one route that the right is using to label gay people a threat to children. The major anti-LGBTQ push lately has been centered on calling queer people pedophiles, or groomers, and stoking fear about LGBTQ teachers indoctrinating kids. This isn't a new tactic, but it's become mainstream again thanks to conservatives collectively going all in on anti-LGBTQ bigotry, particularly transphobia. Following the passage of Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, there's been a massive increase in rhetoric about LGBTQ people, especially teachers, grooming children into being queer. They want the public to view queer people as a threat to children in order to justify attacks on queer people. The acceptance of queer children is likewise framed as a threat to children, because the most dangerous thing you can do to a child is accept them for who they are. Anti-trans activists frequently use rhetoric designed to frighten their audience, such as in Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, which advances the claim that being transgender is something which young people are seduced into by the internet and their peers, and has a cover which features a kid with a massive hole in their stomach, which sends a scary message to parents that offering acceptance to their trans children will hurt them, presumably via a very large hole punch. Which, if we compare the mental health outcomes and suicide rates of trans children who do receive familial support to those who don't, acceptance is very obviously a good thing. And the fear of transgender women being a danger to cisgender women in bathrooms and sports is used to advance policies which harm all women. It would be super cool if someone made a video about that. I could list examples of fear politics for another several hours. Hell, with rap, rock and roll, punk, heavy metal, jazz, blues, there's enough material to go on for hours about just the musical genres that have been subject to moral panic. And if we scrubbed through the average retiree's Facebook page, I could talk till the end of time. And don't even get me started on just the word woke. But I think we should move on to why fear politics is used. Plain and simple, fear politics is used because it works. Appealing to people's fears is an incredibly viable political strategy, as we've seen in these examples. And once you've appealed to someone's fears, it's incredibly hard for them to be shaken out of their policy positions. Because fear can often result in people acting very irrationally. Think about how hard it is to change someone's mind on a political position just in general. When was the last time you changed someone's mind in a debate? Had your own mind changed? If you add the irrationality of fear to that, shifting someone's position can become near impossible. You can give the most reasoned, evidence-based argument possible, and it won't do a thing if whoever you're talking to comes in with the belief that LGBTQ people are a secret cabal of child groomers, or that hordes of violent black men are hunting down white women. This also has the additional effect of spurring stochastic terrorism. From the lynch mobs of the KKK, to the bombings and murders of abortion clinics and abortion providers, to the libs of TikTok Twitter account being able to incite bomb threats on a children's hospital. By spurring panic, they perform hysterectomies on minors, which they don't even do. This violence might seem contradictory to the idea of law and order, but it is perfectly in line with it. The law and order philosophy would be better described as not maintaining the law as written, but maintaining the conservative vision of what the law should be. They have always been willing to employ vigilante justice, or rather terrorist violence, such as the explicitly vigilante organizing of the KKK in the past, and organizations such as the Oath Keepers today, in order to achieve their vision of order. Fear has the bonus effect of appealing heavily to the news media. News stations are all too happy to parrot talking points about the drug menace or rising crime because it gets eyeballs on their screens and brings money to their stations. Social media platforms also have a financial interest in fear politics persisting. It drives traffic on their platforms. The most popular posts on Facebook any given day are frequently shock articles from the likes of Breitbart and the Daily Wire. And those seeking to push these narratives can also pay the platforms directly for ad space. As of August 2022, Facebook has been paid $25,000 for sponsored posts pushing the LGBTQ groomer narrative. If you've ever wondered why platforms like Facebook and Twitter seem so reluctant to ban hate accounts, this is why. They have a vested financial interest in keeping the hate accounts on their platform. Fear also allows the right to draw a wider coalition to achieve their goals. The best current example of this would be the rise of the radical feminist or gender-critical movement. This is a group of anti-trans activists who tend to claim that they are liberal or progressive feminists who were just pushed too far by the left's dangerous acceptance of trans people. This leads to figures who were ostensibly liberal to make some rather strange conservative bedfellows, such as the recent praise J.K. Rowling, billionaire author of the Harry Potter series, and person who would march with trans people, if they were oppressed, has had from Matt Walsh, one of the most prominent transphobes in the country, as well as a self-professed theocratic fascist who my legal department has advised me not to call a pedophile, as of this recording, but I can say has a concerning level of interest in the fertility of teenagers. And while this is a prominent example, this is a widespread phenomenon. As we saw in the earlier examples, conservatives were able to get nearly the whole country in on the war on drugs by scaring the hell out of the country. And they got the public so petrified of crime that virtually every politician has to appeal to the tough-on-crime rhetoric to even have a shot at winning an election. There's a discussion to be had on whether fear truly drives people to change their political beliefs, or merely gives them an excuse to act on political beliefs that they already held. J.K. Rowling, for example, had already been palling around with far-right politicians and displaying some very conservative beliefs long before her entire life became devoted to hating transgender people on the internet. And in that same drug war example, pre-existing opposition to racial reform was the best predictor of support for the drug war. But whatever the reality is, the effects are the same. The right gets more votes. The people they hate get more fucked over. Conservative fear rhetoric has another use. We've been looking so far at how it's used as a tool to motivate the conservative base and centrists into adopting certain positions, but it's equally important in its role at quelling dissent from the targeted groups, minorities, and the left. Remember, the literal stated goal of the war on drugs was to prevent black people and the left from effectively organizing via police violence. The Klan of the 19th and 20th centuries sought to eliminate black political power through voter intimidation, a strategy which continues in an evolved form to this day. And most recently, with LGBTQ people, many on the right have been engaging in a constant harassment campaign with the aim of stopping any resistance to anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and policies. LGBTQ people are the most likely group to face online harassment. If you make a post criticizing prominent anti-LGBTQ figures, your mentions are liable to fill up with the most vile of people calling you a pedophile and telling you to kill yourself. Accounts like Libs of TikTok on Twitter exist to direct their massive hordes of followers to harass individual LGBTQ people, often with the aim of getting them fired from their jobs. And many, from prominent LGBTQ activists to anonymous individuals posting in support of trans rights, have been subject to death threats, swatting, doxing, and more. Beyond just individuals, transphobes have also taken to harassing institutions that provide gender-affirming care for transgender people. Obviously, there was the bomb threats against Boston Children's Hospital, but another, more recent wave of harassment against Vanderbilt's transgender health clinic was successful in getting the clinic to stop providing gender-affirming surgery for minors. They claim this is about protecting children, but it's not. They don't care about kids. Well, not quite. The man behind this push was Matt Walsh, and he does care very much about kids, so far as it concerns getting them pregnant. Since the mid-2010s, the right has been relentlessly railing against the idea of safe spaces, but this is not because they are opposed to safe spaces. They're not. From conservative news to conservative social media, to conservative Wikipedia, to conservative dating sites, the right has established countless safe spaces for themselves in virtually every lane of life. No, their issue with safe spaces in practice is that they provide a safe space to everyone, including racial and sexual minorities. They don't want areas where everyone can be free from persecution because they want these groups subject to perpetual persecution. It is imperative to their ends that these groups live in constant fear, because any time they can feel safe is a time the right is losing their power. So knowing what we do about the role of fear in politics, is there anything that can be done to change it? I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not really sure. But that doesn't seem like a great way to end the video, so we're gonna get a second opinion. So I asked Dr. David Blight, the Pulitzer-winning Sterling Professor of History at Yale University, as well as like 80 other accomplishments that I'll put on screen right now because there's literally too much to say here. Dr. Blight also didn't have a simple answer on what can be done to get fear out of political discourse, and didn't seem to think that such a goal was even achievable. One approach he did bring up, though, was that if fear politics were inevitably going to be one of the driving forces of conservative electoral politics, the left can always just use fear more effectively. This video has focused primarily on conservative fear politics. But the right is by no means alone in their efforts to use fear to drum up votes. Republicans campaign on overturning abortion rights by telling their base, if we don't win, they'll kill a bajillion babies. But Democrats likewise campaign on abortion rights by telling their base, if we don't win, they'll strip away reproductive freedom. And Dr. Blight pointed out the Republican Party of the 1850s, and how they stoked fear over the slave power conspiracy, the political influence wielded by the Southern slave-owning class in the government, while the Democrats claimed every Republican was a radical abolitionist, no matter how moderate they appeared. Republicans were eventually able to get Lincoln into the White House, in no small part due to the help of fear politics. So fear politics can work for the left, but if we are to do so, I feel we'd need a serious change in approach. There are definitely current issues the left can capitalize on. Climate change, gun control, and reproductive rights, just to name a few. But are these as effective as issues that can appeal to people's latent bigotry? And are our pundits and politicians willing to be aggressive enough to make them stick? Remember, conservative pundits have no qualms branding the LGBTQ population pedophiles, or black teens super predators. If you want to motivate your supporters with fear, you've got to be willing to be a lot more ruthless with your opposition. Is the Dem establishment willing to go all in on the narrative that Republicans will sacrifice the world for oil money, or sacrifice school children for gun lobby money? And do this in a way that reaches voters more effectively than claims of gay pedophiles and black criminals? Dr. Blight acknowledges that fear politics simply work, and he stressed that we're not going to get rid of them by just saying, this is bad. But we're not necessarily relegated to just trying to scare voters more than the right does every election cycle. Rather than trying to build our coalition by merely drumming up fear of Republicans among the current voting populace, we can try to reach voters who've been left behind, or often purposefully excluded from our electoral system, by protecting the right to vote of all Americans. Dr. Blight believes that getting more people who are competent and really know their policy running for office can be instrumental too. But achieving this requires a lot of organizing work, and means a lot more people are going to need to run for office. Which, fair. Objectively boring thing to do. I mean, real nerdcore shit, but, It may seem strange to end a video criticizing the conservative use of fear politics by saying, we should also do this. But there's a crucial distinction. As we've laid out, conservatives use fear to motivate stripping the rights from vulnerable groups. The left's use of fear politics, more often than not, is simply acknowledging the reality of that threat in order to protect those rights. We've all got something at stake in this fight. For some, our friends and families are in danger. For some, our rights are in danger. And for some, our very lives are in danger. It's a tough position we're up against. But I'm afraid we can't afford to lose. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. And a special thank you to my lovely patrons who should be scrolling by right about now. If you want your name to be scrolling by right now too, you can donate to my Patreon, links in the description. You can also follow me on Twitter, where I am very funny all of the time. Anyways, have a happy Halloween and make sure to vote afterwards. I voted absentee about 2 weeks back, but my ballot got rejected because apparently when I signed my driver's license as a 16-year-old, it meant that that's the signature I'm going to have to use for the rest of my life, which I signed my driver's license very poorly, so that's going to be lovely.